Who were here last week, both virtually and in person, we made a promise last week. We made a commitment last week. Do you remember? I see laughter. I only see one head nodding, yes. So we made a commitment to go on a verbal diet, to be watchful and mindful of the words we use because our words have creative power. So how did you do? Good? Good. Wonderful. That's great. If you're at home, type in and let us know what experiences you've had in that verbal diet. Were you watchful of the words you said? Did you remember that even when you were alone in the car behind the steering wheel, maybe in traffic that wasn't moving the way you wanted it to, that the words you spoke were creative? Did you remember that? Well, the good thing is we have opportunity to continue practicing being watchful of our words. It's fun to notice, though, how self-condemning our words might be, how judgmental of others our words might be, especially when everything isn't moving the way we had planned it to move. And it's staying in those places of grace and compassion for ourselves and for others when upsets happen, when things don't go as smoothly as we might like them to. We get to choose our words because they are creative. And today we move into the topic of faith. Oh my gosh, it's such a big topic. We could talk about it for weeks. But we won't, because I know you have things to do today. And this chapter is particularly meaningful to me because it causes me to be thoughtful of how I live in faith. Not just live what I say I believe, but how I live in my faith every day. Or those times when I'm not living in my faith, because they happen as well. As part of this human experience, I step outside of that and I experience not living in my faith. And then I get to ask, where do I place my faith? Where do I put my faith? In what do I put my faith? And sometimes I stay faithful in what feels safe, what feels comfortable, whether it's what's right for me to be doing or not. I just stay there because it feels safe. And so when I ask these kinds of questions, I really have to look deep inside. I have to go inward, to spend time with myself inside. And that's where I get to expand my faith. That's where I get to jump into it all over again. And then learn about what it means for me on any given day to live my faith in the world. And that looks differently as time passes. It looked differently 10 years ago, and it'll look differently in another 10 years. So Charles Fillmore has a few things to say about this concept of faith. He said that faith is the perceiving power of our mind. Of our mind. It's the perceiving power of our mind. And it's combined with the ability to shape substance. So what is substance? Substance is that energy, that essence that is behind everything, that is underneath everything. It's the underpinning of all that exists. That is substance. So our faith has the ability to shape that substance. working with imagination, our gift of imagination, shapes our substance, shapes the substance of our life. Before we can realize anything in life, we have to imagine it. We have to think it. We think it into existence. If I never use my imagination, if I never allow those thoughts to become vivid and rich, filled with color and shape and texture and dimension, they can't come into existence. And there's a couple of phases of faith. We begin with blind faith, where we believe for the sheer belief. And a lot of times New Thought people will practice that by having faith that they find the right parking spot. They build their faith on that because time and time again, they don't know how those spiritual laws work. They don't know how it's happening. But they're experiencing, they're getting that prime parking space. They're getting the job that they really wanted. Life is happening for them. And then we grow from that. We don't stay in that. That's a youthful faith. That's blind faith because we don't really understand it. It's happening, but we're not sure how. But as we practice spiritual principles and spiritual law, we move into understanding faith. We move into a way of knowing that spiritual laws are always at work. We don't question gravity. We don't question the laws of science. And there's spiritual laws that move in the same way. So we understand how those laws work. And we talked about the law of circulation when we are giving of our tithes and offering. When we give, we might clean out a closet and empty it and give whatever the contents of that closet is to a charity, to someone who needs what we no longer need. And we have now this empty closet. Empty closet is part of our being. But the universe does not allow a vacuum. So the universe fills it. And we learn how to invite into our life. We learn that law of mind action. Thoughts that we hold in mind tend to produce more of the same kind. So we hold thoughts of what we want to see in our life. And voila, it happens. That's understanding faith. As we use the laws of spiritual laws, and we use them just as we use electricity, just as we use gravity. And you know, Eric Butterworth asked this fabulous question: where is our faith? Is our faith in God? Is our faith from God? When we have faith in God, we're looking out here for our support. We're looking outside of ourselves. When we look outside of ourselves, we might be looking to others. We might be looking to a life partner, a spouse, for our happiness. That's not their job. When we agree to live in a relationship with another, it's not so that they will make us happy. It's so that we can bring happiness together, that we can bring the happiness in us to the equation of a relationship. So we can't look outside to others to fulfill us. We have to look inside. So we place our faith within. There's a lot of within work in this practical metaphysics. And you've noticed every week we talk about being within. It's when we are within that we feel that presence. I hope that during the meditation that you were able to connect to that presence, that you were able to feel that in you. That's where we place our faith, that spirit, that presence that is in us. Yes, it's in each of us, but no one else is responsible for making my life. My life comes from within. As within, so without. Because we hear the words of Acts 17:30. For it is God. We live and move and have our being. So when I'm looking outside of myself, I'm looking for the world. The world can't fulfill us. The world can support us. We can acquire the things that we need in life to have a full and happy life. The house, the car, the jobs, the relationships. But we have to be set inside first. We have to have that intimate relationship with that presence and that power. So everyone has faith. You are a spiritual being living in this human experience. So everyone has faith. It's part of our beingness. We can't be absent from faith except in our own thinking. We can't be absent from love except in our own thinking. We think of people who were very faithful. We think of Gandhi, Mother Teresa, perhaps the Dalai Lama. We think of Jesus, the Christ, as people of great faith. But they have no more faith than you or I. We're faith-filled people. The question is, where do we place our faith? Do we place our faith in worry? Worrying about what tomorrow holds? Do we place our faith there? Is that where we spend our time? We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We could spend a lot of time worrying about that, and then the tomorrow after that. Do we place our faith in doubt? Doubting whether we're intelligent enough, young enough, rich enough, this enough, that enough. Is that where we place our faith? Is that where we spend our time thinking? Or do we place our faith in confidence of divine truth? In confidence that those unity principles that we speak into existence every week, that there is one God, there is one presence and power moving in the universe. And that presence and power is moving as us. Do we place our faith in that? That we are as equally divine as the next person? Where do we place our faith? If it's in worry, wow. Life is going to go in the way of worry. If it's in divine truth, then we have that inspiration, that divine inspiration that leads us and guides us without error always. And faith doesn't change our reality. Faith changes the way we perceive our life. It doesn't change the reality of life. John 7:24 says, do not judge by appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. Don't judge by what life looks like. Each experience is more than that one moment in time. Who can look back on their life? The tough times, the easy times, and see great purposefulness in all of it. Because it's every movement of the universe of our past that brought us to today. And I don't know about you, but I'm really delighted with where I am today. And if we're not delighted with where we are, hang on. Hang on, because it's not over. This is one moment in the entirety of our lives. One moment. And it's forming us and shaping us. So how we perceive this moment will determine how we move into the next and the next and the next. So what do you see in this moment of your life? Are you happy and overjoyed with it? Yay, if maybe not so much, yay too, because we get to shape it. We get to shape the future with our faith. Each experience is more than what it appears to be. Each of us are more than what we appear to be, or what we feel like in that moment. If we feel frail and unsteady, that's just in that moment. We can get our grounding, we can get our footing, and we can carry on. And when we step back, when we step out and take that God's eye view of life, when we take that bigger perspective of our life, I can clearly see how and why some of the things in my life happened, the choices that I made that seemed so foolish and ridiculous and took me in a path that, oops, a do-over would be nice. But all of that brought me here. All of that is carrying each of us into our tomorrows. So when we lift our vision from the muck and the mire and the messiness of the human experience, and we lift it into the truth of that divine experience, that divine that we really are, that spiritual life that is the truth of our living, we see it differently. We can look at it differently. And faith opens all of the channels for our potential. We're pure potential, living in unlimited potential. As Doris notices that potential is a really big word in this book study. It's used over and over and over again. When we become aware of what we're thinking, where we're putting our faith, if it's in worry, we can shift it. When we become aware of what we're thinking, that idea of judgmental ideas about ourselves because we messed up this day, we chose words that were not uplifting for ourselves or for someone else. We critiqued and criticized someone, most likely ourselves. We can then guide all of our thinking, all of our being, all of our faith into truth. And we can move in that understanding faith of knowing the spiritual law and how it works. And knowing, we say that God is good and present in everything. And if we faithfully believe that, are we seeing that God, that good? Are we willing to make something good out of the mess? Are we willing to stand in that until something good is revealed? We know Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the assurance of things not seen. So what is that substance? As we already said, that substance is underlying everything. It's the unlimited potential of the universe. Its substance is behind the seat that you're in, the clothes that you chose to wear, the music that we heard today. That divine substance is behind and underneath and in all of that. That divine, unlimited potential is in everything, everywhere. And in what is not seen. June of 2021, I sat in Myrtle's garden at Unity Village, and I knew without doubt that my time in my church in Dallas was complete. I was not happy with that knowing. I was in a church I loved. I was in a home that I loved. I was in a community that I loved. My Dallas family had become very dear to me. And yet, as I sat in that space of not quite willingness, I knew. And I had faith in that inspiration. That even though I was uneasy, even though I was uncomfortable, it took another 2 months to be able to put that feeling into words. I knew. And you know too. You always know, right? You know that you know. I see every head is shaking, yes. We know when God is moving in us, speaking as us, guiding us and directing us. We know. So I have to practice what I teach, what I say I believe, and the rest is history. So we have those opportunities all the time, because that presence and that power of God is always in us, always moving as us. There's nothing diluted or distilled. That presence and power of God is always as us. When we're willing to acknowledge that, when we're willing to live that goodness. My grandmother was a baker. She was from Belgium, and she said that the French people think that they can cook, but the Belgians really know how. And I would go to her house on Saturdays, and we would bake bread together. Now she had 14 children, and so when my grandmother baked bread, it was a major production. It took the whole kitchen, and she would bake enough bread for her neighbors. That's how her neighbors remembered her. And she would have massive mounds of bread dough, and she would make individual loaves of bread. And she would take a piece of that bread, the raw dough, and put it in a bread pan. And then she would take little small amounts and make dinner rolls. And she would have a tray of dinner rolls. Every one of those loaves of bread, every one of those dinner rolls had the eggs, the yeast, the flour, the salt, everything in it. And that's the way it is with us. We have all of those qualities of God. We're part of that. We can't be separate from that any more than the one loaf of bread could be separate from the mound of flour, eggs, yeast, and salt. We can't be separate from that. But how we choose to live that, how we choose to be that, where we place our faith in that, is the dividing question. And there's no magic. Jesus wasn't the exception. Jesus came into human form as our example of what we can be, of what we can do. He was our great example. And he tells us, these things that I do, you shall do also, these and even greater. So do we have the faith in that power, that presence of God that is in each of us, right here and right now? Do we have faith in that to move forward in our lives, to be all that we're called to be, all that we're here to be, all that we're meant to do? I'll leave you with that question today. Namaste.